got Panopto going as well. And go. So everybody can see that and hear us clearly. I will hand you over to Dr. Fred Amonya. Give a round of applause in the room.
You. Hello. Hi. Hello, William. Hi. 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 How are you? Hi. Yeah, good. Thank you. Good. Right. So, thank you, Jenny. Thank you, John. I want to think that John is online. And William, thank you very much for putting this together. Right. I come to this point from a perspective of the world. I just completed 4 years of running around the world like a headless chicken, looking at transport systems and sharing a group of academics and policymakers, trying to understand this messy world of infrastructure and cities and public space. And in the course of doing that, I met quite a few interesting academics and doctoral students. I guess the camera is fine. I can roll around.
Yeah.
I like to walk a bit.
You can see yourself at the bottom of the screen there.
All right. So I met a few interesting doctoral students, and that time made us ask quite a few questions about what I call the messy space of infrastructure and cities. So that is really the motivation. And I'm pleased to have PhD students and all those online, all the PhD students. You know, it's a privilege. Last week, I was in the city. Having a conversation with people who are trying to make a lot of money and others who are trying to moderate the amount of money those people are making. Now today, I feel I'm home. I'm at a place where people are not trying to make a lot of money, but asking some deep questions. They are pursuing understanding. The currency is knowledge, not money. And I think a PhD is not the path for anyone who wants to make a lot of money. I could be utterly wrong. Please come to me. Let's have a conversation after this talk. All right. So now, going back to this world of people trying to understand the messy space, what comes out is that there's a machinery. There's the machinery that we've used to pursue understanding, to pursue knowledge. And that machinery is what I'm calling the hypothetico-deductive approach, hypothetico-deductive frame. To appreciate it, we need to dig a bit deep in history. Just placing stakes. We shall just place a few stakes on the terrain of history so that we bring this hypothetical deductive approach to life. And the starting point, really the man who brought us HD is Francis Bacon, very early in the 17th century. Bacon argued that, look, we should go and sense, we should go and see, and based on what we see, we should induct, and we will have a more reliable platform of knowledge. Now, before Bacon, we had a world going back to Aristotle, where all was about deduction. So you come up with this almost superhuman, supernatural premise. What must be considered true? What was immutable? Then join it with a premise that is considered agreeable, and from that we can deduct. So if we said this room here is for wild animals, mad animals. Okay, Fred Amonya is in that room this afternoon. Therefore, Fred Amonya is the wild animal. That was really the logic, that reasoning. So now Bacon says, no way, let's see, let's sense. And at the same time, about the same time, there was René Descartes. Now, what René Descartes did was say, hold on, maybe there's something good in what this Baconian school is saying. So René Descartes then says, okay, we can mathematize it, and he popularized it. So he really brought the induction of Bacon to not just a more popular platform, but to mathematics. And I think that's how this work was called the hypothetico-deductive approach started. Now, at some point, I would like us to question it. But before we question it, let's just place a few more stakes on the terrain of history. Now, after Bacon comes Newton. Newton loads that machinery with F equals to ma. And that is something that Newtonian machinery defines all that we say and do today, and what we define, say, over the past 400 years. He was helped. Newton was helped. There was a Norman intellectual called Lagrange. You doctoral students, most of you will have come across this. Studied them in fine detail. So Lagrange joins and improves Newton. Then there was an Irishman, Lagrange being this Italiano French nomad. There was an Irishman, a beer-loving Irishman, that should come as no surprise, Hamilton. Hamilton then really brings this Newtonian frame to beauty, and that work is alive with us today. Work from this beer-loving Irishman, but it was spiced by Euler. So Euler Lagrange. Now, John, I think, is still online. Sometimes I think, I was just thinking of something we might do at some point, and the topic being symmetry and beauty, the place of Euler Lagrange. I just think that is a topic that needs to be discussed with our very, very fine PhDs especially. Okay, so now we moved from Newton. We're now looking at what is loaded, this that is being loaded on HD. We moved from Newton through to across Lagrange. Then we have the Irishman, Hamilton. All right, and Euler doing his providing his insight. And then what happens around that time? Now we've moved from the 17th century, we've jumped into the 18th, and now we're moving fast into 19. And about that time, an Austrian, and a Scotsman, the Scotsman being James Clerk Maxwell, the Austrian being Boltzmann. They say, okay, can we begin looking at what is, my water is gone, but I had water here. What the story would be with all the particles in this little cup, if this was water. Now there we are talking about the order 10 to what? 24, Avogadro's number. Okay. But we move from Newton, who was really looking at his heavenly bodies. Order what? Order, who would struggle with order 3. Really, 2 bodies, but he struggled with order 3. Okay? Now we've jumped to order 24. Number of particles of Avogadro. But the good news is we had statistical mechanics born. Essentially, we had instrumentation that could explain a thermodynamics that was going on at about that time. And to be fair, we had many fine French participants. Okay. Now look at the jump. We've moved from 3 to 10, 24. All right, that is all good. Now, and we're looking at 2 extremes of randomness. That is all beautiful. Okay. Now, let's come to, no, before we come to cities, I want us to arrive at cities quickly. Before we come to cities and infrastructure, then we had this critique of quantum mechanics, starting with Planck, Einstein, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and that enigma, that genius called Paul Dirac. That's now we're talking about what, 1920s and peaking probably around 1927. Then they going back now to the Newtonian frame, picking on Hamilton and the beauty that had come from a better appreciation of symmetry. The work of Emmy Noether, the Galois, that enigma problematic teenager who did great things. So now, with that as a feed to quantum mechanics, we're able to have another frame. Now we've got 3 frames. The Newtonian frame, coming very close towards the end of randomness of the Newtonian frame, we have quantum mechanics. And at the other extreme, 10 to 24, what do we have? We have SM, statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. So that was basically settled. Now, where are we? We're talking about cities infrastructure. What order? A typical country? 70 million people, 100 million people. We're talking of order 10-7. How about 10-7? What do we do? Do we still have a frame that we can use? Can we still ride on the machinery that we had from Newton? And the 1024 is definitely out. We're now in the middle of randomness, and that's where we see today. And that's the core challenge of infrastructure and cities. And I think we just need to nail this point and think about it closely. Ordinarily, what would happen is this. You have a major airport being built. T3 is one of my favorite examples. You have T3, the problems of T3. Oh, HS2. Last week I was talking to MBA school here, HS2 and related issues. So you have HS2. Now, what is the order of actors involved? In many jurisdictions, in many polities today, you'll find that Every little boy and girl, every teenager is now growing up has got a little a mobile phone on the palm and can express views. Now, that very power of politics to bundle the 10-7 order to say two. So you've got a position of Labour, you've got a position of the Tories, and when the Lib Dems come in, then we all make noise. Nobody wants to admit that we're going to have that they would subscribe to a coalition. Okay? It's for good reason that when you have, if you can bind everybody into two groups, that's easy to deal with. But what happens if you have absolutely no control? You wake up and I'm really upset. I don't care about any party. Go to Twitter and unleash views. That is a challenge, and it's a bigger challenge going back to my old days of Pierre running around the world like a headless chicken. It's a bigger challenge in the emerging economies for one simple reason, that many of them are youngsters. They don't have those strictures and structures, those constraints of politics that we enjoy. So that is a bigger challenge. And the question then is, we are faced now with 10, order 10-7. What do we do? Can we still? We are trying to ride on that machinery, going back to Newton. And the machinery is creaking, and that's what comes out from around. That machinery is creaking. Some of the questions being asked about infrastructure: how much should we invest? How will it be delivered? During delivery, the delivery part seems just intractable. Take T50. In one of the better configured polities like the UK, the T50 has been with us. T50, T3, Terminal 3, Heathrow Terminal 3 has been on the table since the 1950s. Hello, we are still busy talking about it. Right. Now, such challenges are spread across the world. What are we going to do about infrastructure in cities? Now, the big one to introduce today is complexity science. Let me just run through this. So, motivation. I've done the talking. Now I'm just going to quickly run through this slide. We're here to prod HD. How is it challenged by complexity of infrastructure in cities? I've got 8 points. Let me just be sure that we've run through them. The complexity of infrastructure in cities challenge the perceived immutability of HD. Yes, structured pursuit of deduction, going Aristotle to Bacon. We've covered that. René Descartes coming in, and then Newton. Then quantum mechanics, the enigma of quantum mechanics, and I didn't mention. No, let me mention Karl Popper. Good. So then Karl Popper comes. Bacon was really keen on verification. If we can induct, we can verify. Karl Popper comes in and says, "Wait a moment. Now we're in the 20th century. It's not about verification. It's all about falsification. So there's nothing out there that is immutable. It is there until we can prove it false." And the point we need to stress this afternoon is that beautiful concept of falsification resides primarily in the academic corridors. And I think we need to push it out there. What goes out there as research, as science, name it, will go out there as truth. It's more the Baconian verification, Baconian verified out there. Not, hold on, this is tentative, it's going to sit on this table until we prove it false. And I would urge us that we have to do a lot more work to bring out the falsification concept. So that is Karl Popper. 7, back to complexity of infrastructure in cities. None of the frames is fitting. Yes, the creaking of hypothetical-deductive approach. Which hypothetical deductive approach? You notice that I haven't really gone into it because we all do it. Every PhD listening today is somehow working on a hypothesis and is going to seek deduction somewhere. Right. And number 8, so will HD carry us through complexity science? Think interdisciplinarity. Back to this messy world and the order 10-7. The mere fact that these issues all are telling us to move away from our silos, to move away from our disciplinary silos into an interdisciplinary approach. That's one. And if you're going into this interdisciplinary approach, and knowing that in this complexity space, I think I'll talk. How many minutes have I got? I've got what? Still, I'm still fine. I want to save a lot of time for questions. By the way, we can. I don't want to talk like Fidel Castro. Okay. Let me see where. That is induction. All right. I think we can rest there. So, what was I saying? I was talking about yes, this complexity, this pursuit of complexity science. It's really the appreciation that in this space, number one, what have we got to do to this space? We've got to identify, we've got to ask that question. Okay, we're talking about a polity, the UK, Nepal, the city, Kathmandu, or you're talking about whichever country. You ask, okay, what do we have in that space? That's a task of identification, and we might easily we might easily agree that in that space we have the state, market, and society. That is rarely a point of contention. So we have the state, market, and society. But within that configuration, we're talking about order 10-7, because we have these adaptive human beings. And now we're moving away from looking at them as from that passionate view that these are fellow humans, to say, oh, these are nodes, these are dots all around, and they're what? They are adaptive. So once we get to that point, then we're able to move on to attempt mathematizing the space. I think that is the whole pursuit. That is the whole struggle with complexity science. I like that slide because it picks out one of the challenges. Now, if you look at what have there as our XT being the space, and you just being the excitation, which is really a place of infrastructure. So you've got a country, and you've got your order 10-7. Basically, you have HS2 or whichever mega infrastructure you could have. What you're doing, you're throwing that infrastructure onto this space. It's an excitation question. It's you. So how will that space respond? And one of the most interesting, probably the most important parameter, is that psi. It's about institutions, norms, and values, because that's now the thread. It's now the thread that runs across the order 10-7. Norms and values, institutions. So I needed to stress that point, and yeah, we've covered that from Newton to the other side, statistical mechanics, and in between complexity science, and asking, so what next? Remember, inside this this complexity science, that's where we have your state, market, society, the interacting order 10-7, and right now we're having the struggle to mathematize it. Right now, it's about my turn to start asking questions. First, let me leave a helpful. I think I stole a shot from David Kronkower of Santa Fe Institute. I think it's very informative. I like it. Talking about that randomness being where complexity science is. Okay. Now, I promise not to speak like Fidel Castro. I prefer now to just step back. Let's start asking a few questions. Then we can go doing the exploration. Okay. HD has been with us. And the PhD is online, our doctoral student. How, looking at cities and infrastructure, how are you using HD? What questions are you asking of this space of infrastructure and cities? So it's now my time to ask so that the doctors, especially the doctoral students, and anyone else can come in and ask a few questions, maybe in response. Okay, have a go. How will I know who is? Let me see. I think I've got the screen pretty. Let me just see. I stopped, but I just wanted to continue with it. Would it disturb? Would it disturb the participants trying to ask?
Should be able to put their speakers, their microphones on. We should be able to hear them.
Yeah, I think that's much better. Let me just have. Yeah, I like that one. I like that one. That is what's going to help them ask the questions. Okay. Right. Now I'm doing the listening. Let me pose the question again. In your doctoral work, first, what research questions are you asking? And how do those research questions interact with the reality of complexity of infrastructure and cities? Many nodes interconnected, they are adaptive, they're evolving fast. That workhorse we call F equals to MA, which has defined everything. The entire economics, more or less the entire economics is F equals to MA. Okay, and of course, more or less everything we have here. Few M feeds, maybe one or two, but it is at that level of truth, F equals to MA. So that is CRIC. What are you doing about it? Now I'm doing the asking.
So if you go to the last slide again.
The last slide.
Yeah, the one that you borrowed
from David Krakauer. Yeah. All right.
So what's that saying? That's saying that.
What's happening?
That didn't work. Yes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if something is regular, you can predict it using F equals MA, and it's not complex. If something has got 10 to the 24 actors, it is so random that it starts to obey statistical rules. And the problem is that when you look at cities with maybe 10 to the 6, 10 to the 7 actors, it's neither one thing nor the other. And that actually is your highest level of complexity. Mm-hmm. So that's the thesis, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. So then go back to the other slide that you had got, the one that you recently left us on. So the one across the bottom that says far from equilibrium, is that closest to equilibrium at the edges, or is that?
Good question.
Yeah.
No, beautiful question. Yeah. It allows me maybe to some of these. And let me. I want you to go back to. Let me just go back to. We're talking of, now we're talking about the complex space, infrastructure and cities. We are essentially talking of a strongly non-linear space, one, and could be highly non-algorithmic, meaning in the side, the institutions, you'll find them changing, and the changes are most pronounced in the young economies, especially the states that are emerging from independence, some of them fighting. The norms and values are changing. So you've got not just a linear, algorithmic space, question then is, what do we do about it? Going, and I'm responding to the issue of prediction. The first thing we do when we encounter nonlinearity, you probably all know it, is try to hunt for some fixed point, some place where you can is fixed. You can bring in a Taylor expansion and work through. I know we have a very diverse problem here, so but work through phobia, and you're able to, you're basically able to predict. Okay. If you cannot, how do we then determine that fixed point? That's the key thing. How do we determine that fixed point? And in respect to complexity, fixed point would be a time when politics comes together. 1997, Tony Blair, huge majority. The country is more or less all together. Big things get done. Okay? That comes close to fixed point. But what happens when you are performing? You then begin relying on serendipity. You can't tell when the next player will happen. You cannot. So you begin relying on serendipity. But the PhD is here. You're going out into the world. The world is expecting you to have answers. And the best you can do is tool yourselves so that you can respond very fast when you notice that there could be some calm, there could be a fixed point emerging. How far are we? I'm still on the question. Then how far are we? All right. The point this slide is making is that more often than not, once you're talking about cities and infrastructure, we are at this place that is way removed from any calm, any fixed point, and we've got to handle it. So then, how do we do it? And maybe I can say a little bit more. Again, back to the question. What is happening at the moment? What is happening at the moment? There are two approaches. I did do the slide. It's okay. I'll just talk about it. There are two approaches. The first is that I don't have the slide. The first is that we are into big data and data science. You can have these huge degrees of freedom. Okay, 10-7 we're talking about like that cheapness. But then you can attempt to linearize it even though you are not at a fixed point. How do you attempt to do that? You basically try to identify. Now we are going into the brute, the brute of data analysis. You basically try to discover all the modes at play. Say in year X. Then you move to year X plus 1 or quarter X plus 1. Bring your tall, thin matrix. No, all these points, then you have your tall, thin matrix. So basically, imagine you linearize the entire space. Then you bring that tall, skinny matrix. Move it one step ahead. And in so doing, try to discover what modes are most prevalent. Are we looking at a growth? Are we looking at a decay? Are we looking at some sinusoidal pattern? That is work that is right now being championed largely by the team that is the west coast of the United States, University of Washington, probably digging, and quite a few period. Well, Warwick and Southampton. I'm pretty sure some people are looking at that here. But basically, that is one using just brute force. But I think our challenge today is to say we cannot give up on trying to squeeze science from this mess. We can't give up on trying to squeeze another F equals to MA. A frame that is going to help us not just predict, but understand. And that is, if there is a weakness with complexity science, it's young, we cannot talk about weakness. It's the fact that its attention is on understand, not predict. Data science does that very well, the prediction. But we need another ethical same way. We don't just want some brute of a frame. You throw in data, you can somehow tell where you're going. We just need, I guess it's because we're human. We just need to know why, what is happening. And now some ethical framing, and now some purity framing. Can we have another Schrodinger's equation? I think that is the challenge now with complexity science. Yeah, thanks for the question. Let me take another one. Hello.
Anyone online have any questions? Tom.
Am I far from the mic?
Sorry.
Tom has a question.
Yeah.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Fred. Thanks for your presentation. I was just thinking around the decision-making rules of society, predominantly based on economic theory. Where does that fit with this history part, and where on the Newtonian to complexity scale does economics sit? Because we're trying to make decisions according to a certain set of rules. Is that holding us back in a complexity sense?
Tom, the mic is failing us a bit. Maybe it's my mic.
No, it's quite faint, Tom. Just see if we can adjust the sound here.
Okay.
Otherwise, you might have to shout. But I think you're going to need to say it again. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, it was
Just a moment. Tom, just a moment. Jenny is doing something magical here.
Wow.
Yes, speaker.
magic. Okay, I'll speak more clearly as well, hopefully. I was just asking, economics comes from his days of yore. Where does it fit on this chart? Where does it fit on the continuum between Newtonian and the complex? And how does making infrastructure decisions based on a set of rules derived from economics, how does that sit with the complexity of infrastructure and cities that you were speaking of?
Yes, we are nearly there. So where does what sit between the classical mechanics frame and complexity? What is your
economic theory?
Economic theory. Yes, good question, Tom. That should take us back to the razor's edge of Samuelson. I might be biased, but my view is that since Samuelson, since the early 70s, we've not had as much progress in economics. I think what has happened since Samuelson is an attempt to use, especially in the last 10, 20 years, to use this this broad, what I call broad data science to predict, but not to understand. Now, so if we're talking about economic theory, I really think the purity of it, Tom, takes us to Paul Samuelson. And what was Samuelson doing? Samuelson basically attempted to construct a dynamical system. And when he did that, he said, at best, we have a razor's edge. So basically what Samuelson said, economics cannot do it. We don't have a theory of economics that is decently predictive. And you see that happening. What happened to a favorite of mine? What happened to Mark Carney and his attempt at forward guidance? So one of these days you might give us a lecture on that. Remember Mark Carney? I think he made the loudest cry one time when he just gave up, saying, you know what, we're doing this, but we cannot. Okay. So I think that answers your, hope that answers your question, Tom. Economics as a subject is at a point where it should be way deep in this search for understanding of the complexity space. And it's happening. The team at Santa Fe has specified, and Oxford as well. Oxford with there's a complexity group there under new economic. Thank you. That's our desire, that's our pursuit, that's our struggle to try and squeeze out some ethical statement for not just economics but complexity as well. But for that to happen, we need to embrace interdisciplinarity. And this is another challenge. How do we come to a point where we can knock those silos that divide our lives at universities across the world? How do we knock them so that we engage more? Yes?
So I mean, I guess your F equals MA is what I would call a physics model. So it's a model based on understanding. It's not just, how can I interrogate this set of data and see a pattern? And then the pattern might be useful for prediction, but actually it doesn't. It's not accompanied with an understanding of the events.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think I would agree with you. And your question, which is possibly rhetorical, but it's absolutely right. How do we break down those barriers? So UKCRIC was always meant to be about more than just the engineering, more than just the infrastructure, more than just the transport systems. But some of the others on the call, Tom might say, it's actually been really quite difficult to try to get non-engineers to engage with UKCRIC. So at the moment, Jenny and I are running a thing called IPAC, which is Infrastructure for Port and Coastal Towns and Cities. And we have, I think, on that group got some non-engineers, which I think is good. And it is very much about, it is solutions for port and coastal towns and cities, which are infrastructure based, but the purpose of them is very much about society. And it's interesting that there's been a recent call for proposals in the area of resilience of coastal communities. It's actually supported by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, the Natural Environment Research Council, the Economics and Social Science Research Council, but not Engineering and Physical Sciences, which is a real omission, in my opinion. And funnily enough, our network is supported by EPSIC. So, how can we do it is really difficult. People talk about interdisciplinary stuff, but very often they only want to do interdisciplinary stuff because it will help advance them in their discipline, because that's how we're assessed. We're assessed by our peers in our discipline, by advances that we make in our discipline. And it's very, very difficult to try to break that down.
Maybe UKCRIC is a bridge, just looking for some boost in terms of funding.
Yeah. So no, I think UKCRIC can be a bridge, but the difficulty that we've had is persuading non-engineers to get involved. But actually, one thing that does bring people together is money for a project. I think we have found that. So maybe that's the answer. You actually have got to make available funding for interdisciplinary projects, but then you've got to follow through. You've got to have some of them succeed and lead on to something else.
Do you think the state in and of the UK has captured that message, or the need for interdisciplinarity? And let me qualify my answer by just looking at my question, by just looking at Santa Fe Institute. Santa Fe emerged for Manhattan via Los Alamos. And does it mean sometimes we need these extreme moments, likely moments of crisis, to bring us to the appreciation of some of the imperatives of our time. Could it be that we just need this moment? But if we needed, and I'm asking you here, if we needed these moments of crisis, how about Brexit, COVID? Do you think that has had a role in waking us up?
So that's interesting. COVID, I think you did see people come together. I think you did see people from medicine and engineering, possibly sociology, come together. I don't know whether sort of having worked out, I think it's probably fair to say that the solution that we've ended up to COVID is essentially a medical one. It's a vaccine. Initially, people were getting involved. We were talking about air conditioning on trains and in public transport. There was a huge awareness of how bad the air quality in many buildings was. And there were also potentially social interventions. But I think what's interesting with COVID is that where we've settled down to is we'll go and get vaccination every 6 months, and then we'll carry on as we were. Climate change might do it, and I think it's interesting with iPads. UKCRIC, I think, is a really good project, but I think it was always engineering focused. So the initial investment in UKCRIC was in facilities, not in projects, and they were engineering facilities, basically. And that's been quite difficult to persuade other disciplines to hop on board. I think iPact is different, because iPact was conceived at the outset, not necessarily by the research councils, but by me, by accident, I've got to say. But it was conceived at the outset as being something that had to be interdisciplinary, so something that wasn't just engineering. So I think we have now got a group of 5 or 6 people, and it is only 5 or 6 of the key investigators, with some skin in the game. But actually, we're funding some other projects, and I think that will. So I almost think that deliberately setting up a small network that has the expectation that it will expand is a way of doing it. So I think, to answer your question, the crisis, unfortunately, you probably need multiple crises to make something happen, or to make a difference. Because if there's a crisis which is solved, we all breathe a sigh of relief and forget about it. If it's something which continues to happen, at that point we possibly think, yes, we do need to do something about it. But I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I hadn't thought about that until the provocation of your question.
That's interesting.
So I'm not sure about Brexit. The problem with Brexit is that I still think that people. There is still no agreement. You go back to Tony Blair. Where we are at the moment is that our country, like other countries, is split almost 50-50. And the trouble is that when you're split almost 50-50, you just end up with a slight tipping point, one direction or the other, and you end up with all of these extremes. The problem with Brexit is that a lot of the people who supported Brexit will still not admit that it was a bad idea. They still won't admit that their champions made a mess of implementing it. They want to blame the civil service because they messed it up because they didn't believe in it. So I think the trouble is with Brexit is that as a society we haven't even learned from that experience. I think most of the rest of Europe has, because none of them now want to leave the EU.
Some want to join us again, like Scotland.
Well, I think Scotland possibly never wanted to leave, but I mean, in fairness, that's one of the things. If you vote to leave the UK, you won't be able to stay in Europe. So, the Scots, I think, have got some justification for feeling a bit peeved.
I want to ask whether and how you might be doing something about the challenge of breaking up these silos. And I have an aside on how one huge jolt, one huge change might change another space. You recall Tony Blair's brother, Bill Clinton. You recall Bill Clinton 1992, those days at home, Texas, a big hadron collider.
Yeah.
That was shut down, 10 billion, and was employing thousands of PhD particle physics. All of a sudden, they didn't have a job. Where did they end up? Wall Street, and that changed finance.
Yeah.
But those things, we can't design for those things.
No.
Still, maybe we can equip ourselves so that once we see them lacking much, we're able to act and make the most of these jobs. But what is there something you're doing to?
I think from a personal perspective, I think three things. I think UKCRIC is one, but as I mentioned, it is. We probably need to try to do something which is a bit out of the box to really make it accessible to other disciplines. I think IPACT is interesting, and we're now sort of engaged in this other thing, this other coastal communities resilience thing, where we as the engineers are the junior partners, because it's actually led by ESRC and the rest of them. And the other thing is that there's a programme which is run by the Royal Academy of Engineering and Lloyd's Register Foundation called Engineering X. And Engineering X has had a number of subsidiaries. It's really about safety. It's about engineering in the service of humanity. And it's had a number of strands. One of them has been safer end of engineered life. So basically, we started off looking at ships and large offshore structures. Most large ships ended up being broken on the beaches of India, Bangladesh, or Pakistan by people with no PPE. And while there are environmental problems with that, there are also huge personal problems for people actually doing the work with no real training, no real protection, no health and safety at work, no PPE. So we started to address that. We started to look at the end of life of other engineered products and came to the view that actually it's processes rather than products that were a real issue, including open burning. So there's been a major push trying to tackle open burning. We also had a strand on pandemic preparedness. There was one on safer complex systems. There was one on engineering skills where they're most needed. So the people involved in that are all a bunch of enthusiasts. And one of the things that I think unites us is that although we're coming at it from the point of view of engineering, we realise that in many cases the solution is not more engineering, it's less engineering, or avoiding having to have engineering. So I think that also kind of is a way that you go outside other disciplines and you don't just think, actually, society can do what on earth it wants for a very short-term gain, and engineering will sort the problem out because it becomes unaffordable. So there's a thing, quite an interesting theory called factor 4 and factor 40. So apparently there was a really interesting program the other night about the diesel engine, and the original diesel was meant to run on peanut oil. So that's what he invented it for. And it's an internal combustion engine rather than a steam engine, which is an external combustion engine. And what the presenter, which I think is probably true, is that the efficiency of a diesel engine is 30%. Efficiency of a steam engine is 10%. So immediately you've got a threefold increase in efficiency. But there is a fairly well worked idea that technology will deliver you an increase in efficiency, which is factor 3 or factor 4. But the problem is that as soon as the power becomes available more cheaply, we use more of it. So, you think about how many electric motors you've now got in your home. And for those of us who are a few decades old, it's probably an order of magnitude more than the number that you used to have in your home. You didn't have very many appliances with electric motors. Rinse and repeat that, it even worse with modern electronics. So, the trouble is that when technology becomes cheaper or energy becomes cheaper, people want more of it. And you get to the stage that you actually need a factor of 40 efficiency improvement, which you will never deliver. So the only solution then is behavioural change. So there's a guy called Julian Allman, and he's written a book on sort of materials. he makes the point that, so we're all worried about batteries, battery cars, there isn't enough of certain metals, cobalt and so on, that we need to be able to have battery cars that we think we can make. But even something like steel, apparently there is 38 tons of steel per person in circulation in a society like the UK or America. There is not 38 tons of steel per person on the planet. So it follows that, you know, the whole world cannot be as extravagant in its use of even something as mundane as steel as we are in a so-called developed society. So that is the reason we need to think about doing things differently. And I think the other problem is that all of our governments work on a 5-year cycle. What do I need to do to get re-elected? And we're kind of like kids who stuff ourselves with sweets and then don't care about our teeth falling out in 5 years' time, because that's never going to happen. And in some sense, I think we need political systems which are stable enough that you have a set of principles and a set of goals. But the goals are, it's actually, no, it's principles that are more important than goals. So I think if you live your life according to certain principles, you don't quite know where it will take you. But what you do know is that wherever it takes you is going to be an okay place. Whereas I think that if you just think about how can I make some money out of this and how can I exploit that and how can I get re-elected in 5 years' time, you just end up in a mess.
Provoking. On three fronts, to me. One is I'll start with the question, which is, are those initiatives, beautiful initiatives of yours, knocking at the doors of the state? And to turn the question the other way, should they knock the doors of the state, or should we be looking at something emerging like Santa Fe has done, purely through crisis, very little state involvement, except that the state was pursuing nuclear weapons. But this is just a matter. So that is a question. I'll bring over three. Now, the comment is, last week I was, this is public conversation, I was having, I asked James of National Infrastructure Commission, they are bringing out, they are challenging the state to bring out strong policy statements and review them. And now, if you're going to bring out a policy statement, you talked about the 5 years. Now, that statement is being thrown out into a strong and ambiguous space. Policy review, effective policy review is an extremely expensive exercise, and there is no answer to that concern. Now, that is concern number one. The other one pertains to, oh yes, you reminded me about induction, the induction motor, 1850 to 60 about, okay? And the beauty of fossil fuel. Every time I say that, people get surprised. How dare you talk about beautiful fossil fuel? The thing is high density. The thing is not a problem. Just with hinged on it. It's a beautiful substance. We hinged on it with the induction motor, and with the beauty, again, another beauty of thermodynamics. I mean, that era. So, we have two comments. But the real question then is, are you looking at bringing those initiatives to the doors, corridors of power, or do you see that as an exercise in futility?
So I think we have to try, but I don't think it's the only avenue. And I think you're absolutely right. Even the NIC, I don't think really has thought beyond sort of optimizing a current situation according to current needs, current preconceptions, and all the rest of it. So I do feel that with travel, there is an idea that we can just electrify everything on wheels. And actually, we can't. We will not have enough energy to be able to do that. So we need to think about minimizing our use of travel. Any other hierarchy, the waste hierarchy, it starts at the top with avoid, minimize, reuse, recycle, and so on. But we're very reluctant to say we should travel less and travel better. But I think that is something which people need to get to grips with. I don't really think we should be spending huge amounts of carbon on massive great road improvement schemes, because it's all to increase the capacity of the road so they can cope with what used to be known as the rush hours. We need to pause and rethink. And I think that the National Infrastructure Commission, in my opinion, is disappointing in its lack of thought leadership. It's not really thinking about how do we jump to a totally different space. It's kind of thinking about, how do we keep digging the hole that we're currently in, I think. So I think, to answer your question, we are trying to take some of these things to the doors of power with varying degrees of success. But I think that it's probably, and I think that's necessary, but it's probably not sufficient.
Might we hear some questions from the PhDs or busy in the messy space of infrastructure and city?
Yeah, Joanne's on the line, so I don't know if she has to enter in with something.
Yeah, it's fascinating and it's kind of making my head spin. I'm just processing rather than necessarily got any questions. But it is a very interesting way of thinking.
Joanna, are you still there? Williams just mentioned you.
Yeah, no, I am. Thank you. And I apologize. I had a time sensitive commitment that I knew was going to come in during this webinar, and it came in literally as you started. So I missed basically most of the presentation. So I apologize for that. But maybe I just need a few minutes just to think, because I've heard what I've heard is lots of the discussion just now. But while I'm just having a think and a reflect on that, I was going to ask if there was something specifically you wanted me to comment on.
So yeah, Joanne, it was essentially the message of interdisciplinarity. How we're trying to take it to the corridors of power, but is that enough?
So, is it enough? Is that the question?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel that we're not getting the traction it would be nice to get with politicians, but you might think that I'm being pessimistic.
No, no, not at all. I think it's not a question around interdisciplinarity necessarily, to be honest. I mean, I think now this might be just way too idealistic. I can almost see your eyes rolling, William, as I'm going to say this. But I think politicians have to be kind of, know a lot about a lot of things, but be masters of probably very few of those. So I think by nature they exist in a very interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary space, and I think. So I don't think the issues with traction on important priorities like net zero and climate change aren't a matter of disciplinarity perspective so much as getting. I was going to say getting the messages right. That's totally wrong. It's unhooking the way that politicians and governments have been running society, running countries for a good 50, 60, 70 years now, unhooking them from that way of doing things and what they think are the indicators of success, and fundamentally changing kind of what government does and what it's about as far as its obligation to the people is concerned. And that's where I think the traction issues are. But that I'll stop there in case you really are rolling your eyes a lot.
Do you have a comment?
No, I mean, I think what Joanne says is right. I think maybe the message that needs to get to the corridor of power is it's not so much the importance of interdisciplinary stuff. It's more probably about doing things differently.
Yeah, or doing different, doing different things.
Well, okay, if you like. Yes, yeah. doing different things to achieve aims differently. Like, yeah. So yes, it depends, but yes, you're probably doing different things.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm thinking is the aims you know, that all of the government is set up to deliver a whole ruck of aims that are around, you know, economic growth for one, but not solely. They're about standards of living and but thinking largely economically there. Just trying to think of things that came in kind of after the Second World War as well, around provision of certain types of services. And actually, I think there's a fundamental shift going on very, very slowly, because climate change has really changed what those aims need to be. They are very different from the aims of, you know, post-World War UK, Europe, and actually different from a little bit before that as well. I think that's what I'm kind of trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, but the trouble is, in some sense, government's message is extremely difficult, because nobody wants to be told they can consume less, they've got to travel less, they have a lower standard of living than their parents did, and that economic growth is going down. And actually, what I don't think we've quite yet worked out how to do is how do we do what needs to be done to mitigate and adapt to climate change, to a greener future and so on, without losing a lot of those things. I think that in many people's minds, those two things are coupled. So you said, Fred, about we binged on fossil fuel, and that's exactly what we did, because every year we put 1 million years worth of CO2 into the environment. We did that for 100 years, and it's going to cause a problem. The trouble is, our tendency is to be to eat all the sweets in the jar, and never mind that we're going to be sick in an hour's time and get bad teeth in 5 years time. That just seems to be, you know, it's extremely, you know, we can berate governments, I suppose I can berate governments, but, you know, in some sense, if they don't get elected next time, that's the challenge. It's actually sort of selling the message to the wider public, I suppose.
And I, just to come in there, I really like that binge on all the sweets in the jar imagery there, and it goes along with this idea of a silver bullet, because actually we'll binge on any sweets in the jar, whether they're aligned with climate, you know, mitigation or adaptation or not, and anything times 8 or 9 billion people doing it is probably not a good thing, even if it was conceived as a good thing to start with. And so there's that point. And also we're looking, you know, I think governments around the world are looking for those small number of sweets in the jar that are going to make the big change, the silver bullet. And actually, I'm not sure that's the best approach either, because any silver bullet, again, multiplied by X number of countries in the world, or 8 or 9 billion people doing it, probably isn't going to deliver what you thought it was going to when it wasn't scaled up like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have perhaps my final observation and question to you, Craig, and I'll finish this. And that takes us back to pre-COVID. Now, before COVID struck, we had a very strong push for cities. That was worldwide. And that push was well seated. It was seated in a pretty rigorous platform, systems, started with systems. And that takes us back to the work of the late 90s, Geoffrey Western group that was now maturing. Okay, here's the challenge though, and this is the observation just before COVID. We would start talking about cities at the framing stage when these projects are being, say, when they're being designed, talking about systems, okay? Then we move out there. Now I'm bringing the other side of me. Once to go out there, all that rigor would be lost. We are back to the usual cursory, meaningless empirics. So question, how do we construct a kind of continuity from the initial rigor of the design rooms and the science of the physics into seeing that through to when these projects are being delivered? When you have these consultants and FCDO people now, then DFA talking to governments and the way, the frames you use to try and analyze the problem. Systems will be completely lost. You go there and about systems and complexity, zero. There's hardly any indication that that is what motivated politics in the first place. So, to UKCRIC, one, where is UKCRIC in a possible revival? I don't know if we can go back to the old push for cities, but where would UKCRIC sit? And secondly, how do we realize this kind of continuity where we have a frame, we see that through to a point of delivery? And so that's the
So Joanne's going to come in. Before Joanne does, my sort of immediate thoughts were Little Book of Cities, and also, just remind people that you can't, as they used to say on Star Trek, you cannot change the laws of physics. Anyway, Joanne.
Oh, you can't make me follow a Star Trek quote. That's unfair. Actually, I was going to make. So I think it's quite a hard question to ask where UKCRIC sits on these things, because these are, it's not a straightforward question to answer, and UKCRIC isn't a straightforward grouping. It's a collaboration, and so necessarily there's variation among the members, and rightly so. But the observation I wanted to make was that I completely agree with you, Fred, about the science of cities, there being a strong science of cities out there being some really, really good work. But underpinning the science of cities is the assumption of population growth. And I think that is an assumption that is being now tackled a little bit. I recall raising this 15 years ago in a meeting and being very resoundingly told that this was not up for discussion. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I hear this now on the radio and elsewhere. This underpinning presumption of population growth is what drives the cities agenda. But I think that underpinning assumption is being questioned and addressed more head on than it has in the past. And so maybe your reflections on that, I'd be very interested if whether you agree or do you disagree, and your reflections on it.
So that is a very good point, and it almost brings us back to climate change. And we in universities, we live in quite a rarefied environment, and you rarely talk to somebody who doesn't not only accept that climate change is happening, they also agree that it's anthropogenic. When you talk to people out on the streets, that is not far from the uniform view. There are some people who don't think it's happening. There are some people who think that it would happen anyway, and there are some people who actually think it's happening and it's all too late. And I possibly have a degree of sympathy with that view, because, and actually, if and when governments get to a point where they do accept that it's too late, at least for certain parts of the world, actually, maybe some sort of strategy, which is over a generation or two, how do you prepare for living in a very different kind of world where actually many parts of the world that are currently inhabitable will not be inhabitable? But it's interesting, Joanne, that you think that people are now sort of beginning to say, well, actually we can't assume that world population is just going to continue to grow exponentially, because actually it's not, that really is not sustainable. But you're absolutely right that up until very recently, you could not say that.
Two aspects, Sean, to your question. First is that when you look at the mature ecologies but young economies in Africa, South Asia, population is growing and cities will grow. Right. Other places that can be debatable. But aside from what is driving the growth of cities, is a core question: how can we understand cities? And when we have a framing, a fairly rigorous framing of cities, if we can see into cities, can we have that right across to the point where we are taking some actions out there? And my observation and really challenge is that decay is very fast when you go out there, all this talk of systems, the science is lost, and that becomes a real problem. That was a problem before COVID. I don't know whether cities will come back with the same jolt, and if cities do come back with the same jolt, are we going to see a better platform of continuity where science carries on to the points of delivery? Observation. But now the PhDs who are trying to look into this mess, cities, construction. I don't know how many are online, but it would be good to hear a few comments just before we close.
I'm going to have to go because I've got to be at the other campus for a meeting at 3 o'clock.
Yep.
So we'll leave you to have some other comments from the other people online. But thank you very much for a very thought-provoking, a very interesting discussion, a very thought-provoking presentation. And I understand from Joanne that we're talking about Africa CRIC.
Oh yes, there is that conversation.
Very good. Okay, but anyway, thank you very much. So I will slip off, but I think we can wrap up with a few questions from you.
What was the name of that materials book convention?
It's called Sustainable Materials Without Hot Air by Julian Allwood. Something like that, anyway. I think I've got a copy if you want to borrow it.
Yeah, because the steel thing sounded very interesting.
Yeah. It's got lots of little
Underline my
snippets in
entire
it.
PhD.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Thanks for the information.
Okay.
William.
Thank you.
I found them very useful.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes, it's very thoughtful. Thank you. But thanks for coming. Okay, I'll leave you guys to wrap up.
Yeah.
Okay, nice to see you. Bye, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Bye.
Okay, how many minutes do we have? Oh, we have maybe about 13. Are there any questions, any comments from our PhDs? You can tell that I've got a soft spot for the doctoral students.
I guess my thoughts on it, so my research, okay, it comes with infrastructure, but it's quite a specific structural engineering rather than necessarily population cities thing. But when it comes to interdisciplinarity and trying to solve problems, I think that's where events like this and groups like the CDT and UKCRIC are really helpful, especially as the PhDs were kind of at the beginning of that journey, whether we go into industry, whether we stay in academia. I can really tell that the people who run these groups are trying to get us to learn that interdisciplinary, get rid of the silos thing. So I think, I don't know, in 3, 4, 5 years' time, when we complete our PhDs and then start working or whatever, hopefully that might grow. So they're sowing the seeds.
Have you ever thought twice about PhD, hypothetical-deductive thing?
Not explicitly, no. I guess it's just kind of assumed that that's
It's very rare.
the method.
Okay.
And I come from an arts background, so I did my degree in fine arts.
Mm-hmm.
And even there, I think back now, and actually it's very similar, that kind of like, you have a hypothesis, you have a problem that you're wanting to solve, you go through a series of processes or kind of experiments with your art, and then you choose the final kind of like, this is the solution to the questions I probed myself at the beginning in a visual format. And I think that sort of, like you say, it's in Francis Bacon, I presume it's the artist, Bacon or the other one?
Yeah, Francis Bacon.
So and he was exploring his kind of his thoughts through this kind of visual aspect, as well as kind of through the science and through the maths. And when I was doing my thesis, that idea of kind of beauty and kind of symmetry kind of within art, and that kind of people are attracted to that sort of thing, kind of, quite deeply. So actually, kind of, when I do this sort of work and I think about kind of different disciplines, remembering that different disciplines have different strengths of voice. So kind of we might be here as engineers going, we think we've got the solutions, but actually you need to kind of open your ears to the other voices, to kind of maybe to the arts or to humanities or to social sciences, and allow these other voices kind of an opportunity to kind of to talk and say, well, this is our point of view, or this is our understanding of the problem within a city. So if you spoke to a social scientist, or you said you were at business school yesterday, they would have a different slant on a particular problem. People might say, well, the problem with cities is people related, or the problem with cities is kind of green infrastructure, or the problem with cities is money, or the problem with cities is this and this. And each of these different disciplines is going to come at the problem for a different direction, like a diamond, multifaceted. Everybody is not that any particular discipline is wrong, it's just a different side of that sort of multifaceted place. And that's what makes cities interesting places. They're full of people who love the arts, they're full of people who love music, they're full of people who love science or history or economics or kind of infrastructure. You know, and all these different people living together. You talk about kind of power, 10 to whatever. You know, all these different people with their different complexities kind of bring that beauty to the city place. And I think actually for me, it's the people that live in the city that make the city what it is. The people of Southampton are different to the people of London, to the people of kind of Kuala Lumpur. You know, we're all kind of different. You know, we've lived different lives, we've had different experiences, and I think that's kind of what brings that real complexity to a lot of these problems. Is that people are complex, and they're kind of the lives that we live are complex problems in themselves. And I think kind of, you know, when we all gather together in these environments that we call the city, you know, you've got all these different problems bumping up against each other, and we try in our different tribes to kind of develop and kind of like answer some of those problems. But there's always going to be a bit of kind of messy edges and kind of compromise and areas where, you know, there are going to be mistakes and people that are let down, or kind of areas of society that are not supported, however good our governments or local politics or systems of care like NHS or kind of education. There's always going to be people that fall through the gaps or get let down by those sorts of things. It's a case of, you know, how do these systems interact with each other? How do these people interact with each other? And you've just got this big hot mess of kind of everything bumping together, which possibly was what makes it interesting and exciting to kind of live in these places that we call cities. Just my thoughts.
Very interesting. And I guess we're soon closing, but I'll pick on from what you just said, which is cities and its instrumentation of infrastructure. Infrastructure really instruments of complexity. So you have this 10 per 7 and then become energy, transport, water supply, information. It's really like instrumentation in this complexity. I think it is a beauty. It's both a challenge and a beauty of our time. Just moving in and trying to understand this mess, this complexity. Something that if any student is out there wondering what to do in fulfillment of their existence, do cities, infrastructure, look at it as a complex system. I think it's very beautiful. The connection between physical beauty, when you go out to a desert and you find these little thorny plants, they're beautiful. We always say they're beautiful, and they're fractals. So the connection between that beauty and mathematical beauty, the beauty of Paul Dirac, which is Paul Dirac had this notion that if it is true, it has to come out in a formulation which is elegant, which is beautiful, like ethical may, not some clunky low expression which is all over the place. I think we have to look deeper into the connection between physical beauty, mathematical beauty and bring that to cities. I really, really believe that as a country, the UK should be doing a lot more to dig in and peer into cities. Let's try to understand it better. I think that is where I might close. And thank you. It's been a privilege. Every time I come and talk about, you probably can tell I like talking about this thing. It's been a privilege. William is left. Thank him. I thank you very much, Jenny, John. Thank you. Thanks indeed. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.